Hello, I am Micah Woods, the Chief Scientist at the Asian Turfgrass Center and the Director of Pace Turf's Information Service. This is the ATC Double Cut, where I have a chance to talk about turfgrass topics from around the world, topics that I've usually written about on my website, and I think that they're so interesting that it is worthwhile giving them a double cut treatment to talk about them also. Today, I am so pleased to have as a guest, joining all the way from Iceland, Mr. Bjarni Hannesson, the course manager at Ness Golf Club. Welcome, Bjarni.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it is morning there in Iceland. It's September. Winter must be rapidly approaching. What type of temperatures do you have today?
Today we have, well, if you go slightly inland, then you're at frost, night frost, and but it's going to creep up to about 10, 11 degrees, which is summer temperature. And here in Iceland, I'll be tanning later on in the afternoon, and eating some ice cream and enjoying the solid 10 degrees that we'll be getting.
Well, yeah, that I remember some June and Julys where you have those kind of temperatures and you're grateful for them.
Yeah, I mean, the highest temperature on my course recorded this year was 16.4 degrees. That's the warmest. I'm not talking average over 24 hours, because the warmest got the other day, 14 degrees for 24 hours. And that was a great day.
So your Ness Golf Club is out on that peninsula, and it's right by so you're surrounded on 3 sides by water, or almost on 4 sides.
I would say we're 330 degrees. It's just a little strip that leads onto that little ball shaped, with just a little tiny peninsula. We're quite close to the city center. I mean, if you hop on a bike, it takes you 15 minutes. You're in Reykjavik city center on a bike. And it's kind of funny because right now, my low temperature for the night was 5.2 degrees. But if you go slightly, I mean, even Reykjavik airport, which is, like I said, 15 minutes away from us, they were at about 1 point some degrees. And if you go slightly further into Reykjavik, then they were at negative. So we don't get as massive swings in temperatures. They sort of stay the same. That means that our high temperatures through the day, you can often find Reykjavik airport being 2, 3, 4 degrees warmer than us.
So you are moderated by all that cold water.
Yeah, but just having that. Well, some would argue it's warm. It's the Gulf Stream. So if we didn't have the Gulf Stream, it would be even colder. But yeah, we used to get more. I mean, for example, we don't have a lot of dew issue even through the summer months. So when we see dew in August, we're like, whoa, look at that. So because we just don't swing a lot, just sort of stays similar temperatures throughout the year. That's not the year, through the summer months.
Well, I thank you for joining me. I was reminded, because it's September, I'm going to start sharing my screen and bring up a blog post that I wrote, and I just checked the date. I wrote this on September 29th of 2013. Now, I've updated it a little bit since then as I moved it over to my new website, but it's a post, Turfgrass Notes from Iceland, that I wrote after I visited for the first time in September of 2013. So that is 9 years ago that I visited in September, and that was just a splendid trip. And I think not everybody's had a chance to go to Iceland. I wanted to talk with you a little bit about turfgrass and golf and sports turf in this really amazing part of the world.
Yep.
And if you'll bear with me, what did I start with? That photo must be Geysir.
That's Geysir Golf Club. Yep.
Yep, which is the most inland course in the entire country, to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah, I think you're correct there. Yep.
Which is something like 60. I wrote some notes. So let's go through these bullet points that I wrote, and you tell me if what I assessed after that initial visit in 2013 is correct, and maybe that leads into some more discussion of how turfgrass is in Iceland today. So Let's see. In this post, which I'll put a direct link to in the show notes, we visited 11 golf courses. You went with me on to most of those courses,
Mhm.
and we also saw geysers, waterfalls, ocean cliffs, volcanic craters, and lawns. So
Mhm.
there's actually uh, for a natural country, there's a lot of grass there and a lot of wild grasses. Like when we were at the
Yep.
Westman Islands, there was fescue growing all over the place, just on the
Yep.
cliffs.
Yep. And we had you saw that blue fescue, the Festuca viviparis, which is with the seeds where they
Yep.
germinate on the grass. So you actually see germinated seeds hanging in the air there. So
Yeah,
we had that quite a bit of that. Yeah.
that's right. And I believe when I visited in 2013, I think that
Mhm.
was your first year at Kalir Golf Club. And
Yep.
prior to that, you'd been at Grindavik. And we
Yep.
saw that grass. You showed that to me in the
Mhm.
some of the lava fields that are around Grindavik Golf Club, which for
Mhm.
people who have been to Iceland and been to the Blue Lagoon, or who have seen that hot spring with those striking colors
Yep.
that's called the Blue Lagoon. It's right near there. You can find this fescue where the seeds germinate right
Mhm.
in the seed head. It's
Yep.
fascinating.
And that, by the way, I'm going to slide in an something that most people don't know. But Grindavík Golf Course is, I believe, and someone might correct us here, but I think it's the only golf course in the world located in the cracks between two tectonic plates. So we often joke about that on the ninth, you actually drive from North America into Europe from because you hit over this little crack in the ground. But to be absolutely fair, the cracking, the zone is about 1 kilometer in width, and you can see it if you fly into Keflavik Airport, and especially if you're coming landing in from the south, then you can see those cracks in the ground because you can, if you just look down, you see the lava field just ripping apart.
Well, you can
So
definitely see that fracture on the golf course at
yeah, yeah.
Grindavik, and
Hmm.
it's quite yeah it's both separation
Hmm.
laterally, but also in a vertical direction where
Yep.
one there's like blocks of rock and a cliff. It's
Yep.
quite a spectacular sight, and
Hmm.
so that is a course that had lots of fescue on it. And I think what type of grasses would we typically see on the golf courses around the coast of Iceland?
Well, we tend to try to grow fescues, the finer fescues. But obviously we have our POA, and especially with all the traffic, we'll probably get into that later on. How popular golf is, but um, we also try to, colonial bands, creeping bands. We haven't been very aggressively trying to grow that, um, just because it's slow out of the gate in
Man,
early summer.
I was just in New Zealand in
Hmm.
early to mid August,
Yeah.
and I saw so much brown top bentgrass there,
Mhm.
and that was really impressive. Now,
Yeah.
that's that's much warmer than Iceland, but definitely the brown top. What a beautiful fine textured grass that is.
Yeah, I mean, just some of the cultivars that we have nowadays are just beautiful. They're absolutely fantastic, and they do fine over here as well. It's just the creepers; they look great in sort of late, well, it's like July, August time. But it's just that May period that we struggle a little bit with the creeping bands.
Yeah, they
Creeping
take
band
a
is native. Creeping band is native to Iceland. Ryegrass, for example, is not. So. Uh, Therefore, ryegrass, for example, over here can crash and burn quite badly with the winter months.
yeah,
But
I've seen some of that. I had such a good time on that September 2013 visit that I
mhm,
subsequently went back to Iceland a couple of times in
mhm,
the spring and early summer season, and
yeah,
it was I got to see some of that winter damage as the ice and snow melted, and yeah, you definitely want to have a grass that can survive under some
you.
ice.
If I'm not mistaken, I think you came here in a year where it was like really cold and dry,
Hmm.
and was late April, early May, or something like that. And we were
Yeah,
playing, but it was like 2, 3 degrees.
well, it was 2015. It was the
Yeah.
spring of 2015. when it was extremely cold when I was there. And I was
Yeah.
back again in 2016, but it was slightly warmer. But it was
Yeah.
2015 that the temperature didn't rise above 2 or 3 degrees. And I recall I've got some blog posts about this because I had my light meter, and we
Yeah.
were coming into May, which is
Hmm.
approaching some really long days. And
Yeah.
it wasn't the sun was it may have even been going into early June uh,
Hmm.
when I was there. And I recall that the daily light integral that I was measuring and the photosynthetic photon flux density with the light meter was
Yeah.
optimum for
Yeah.
cool season grass to grow. It was more light than the grass could actually use. And the
Yep.
temperatures during the daytime were 2 degrees Celsius. The growth
Yep.
potential, the cool season growth potential was zero.
Yeah.
And the grass was not doing anything. And then people
Hmm.
ask me, which is more important, light or temperature? And people
Yeah.
often ask, shouldn't I adjust the growth potential based on light? And I'm
Yeah.
like, you know what? Anytime that it's warm enough for the grass to grow, there's usually enough light. But
Hmm.
temperature can be a limiting factor when light for cool season grasses rarely is.
Hmm. And we
So,
and that's this often happens to us here in May because May is the driest month, and we often get like northerly winds coming in May. And on the south and the southwest, we're located in the southwest, like 70% of the population is. Um, there, it means dry. So if it's coming from the north, that means we're usually, it's rained out for this, north in the country. So we usually have clear skies, but wind coming from the North Pole, effectively. And that's soon after the Masters on TV, and people are just absolutely golf mad at this time. And even though we're not at the Arctic Circle, we're slightly shy of the Arctic Circle. We're at about 64 degrees, and but that means that the
what
sun.
is the Arctic? Is it
Oh yeah,
60?
sorry. The Arctic Circle is 66 degrees north. That means that at 66 degrees, one day of the year the sun doesn't set. You always see the top of it, and that means, technically speaking, the sun sets down here for the summer month, but it gets so it doesn't go that far below, the horizon, so it actually hits the sky. Therefore, you
Hmm.
can play golf 24/7, and
Yep.
therefore we get a lot of play.
Yeah. And I noted that there were 70 golf courses in Iceland. That's what I noted
Mhm.
in that blog post.
Yeah.
And I noted that the population was 320,000 people. I suppose
Yeah.
those numbers may have changed a bit since then.
Yeah, we're up to about 360,000 people. That's huge.
That's
But the golf courses have come down a little bit because I think we're at about 64 or 5 at the moment because some of them have closed over the years.
hmm
The reason why we have a lot of golf courses in Iceland is because every single village seems to have a nine-holer. And back in when golf was booming a little bit here in the 80s, a lot of people did that on volunteer basis. You know what I mean? These are very small clubs, some of them, and that generation is just coming of age, and then the younger generation is like they don't do anything unless they get paid for it. so, so it's harder to run a golf course um, with 50 members,
hmm
even though it's just a nine-holer. Um, but golf, yeah, I mean, the golf courses here in Reykjavik, in the capital area, where about 230, 40,000 people live, they're just absolutely packed.
Right, because you've
We
only got a dozen golf courses or something in the Reykjavik area.
Yeah, we have about, I think yeah, just shy of 20. I think it was like 18 or something courses in that
And
area.
is that eight? I noticed a couple of them have more than 18 holes. So is that 18 hole
Yeah.
equivalent
Yeah.
or?
Well, I'm thinking out of a tee time. So some of them are 9 holes. One of them is at 12 holes. Then 18-hole loops. For example, Reykjavik Golf Club runs Korpa course, which has 27 holes. And then they have like a shorter course, that's a nine-holer as well. So they run the 27 as a 9 and 18, and then they rotate between the which 9 they play as 18 and all that. Um, but yeah, I mean, just to give you an idea, Reykjavik Golf Course also another side, so they have an 18 hole there. So they have 3,800 members. That's a lot of members. Um, we have about just over 6% of the entire nation is a as a golf club member, and more than 10% of the nation actually plays golf.
Oh, wow.
And that
And,
is,
that, and
I
it,
mean,
is that
to put that
adults
into
or the entire
no, that's
population?
out of the entire population.
Wow.
So out of the people who can actually stand and swing a club, that's closer to 8%, I guess. So to put that into perspective, I think the average in the European Union is about 0.5%. So we're more than tenfold the average participation, and then it's the highest in Europe, at least. I think probably the highest in the world, to be fair. So we're
so
a
if
golf mad nation,
so
which
if you
doesn't make
go
any sense given the temperature.
no, but there um as Edwin Rauld, the golf course architect,
Mhm,
has mentioned to me, and
mhm,
I would suggest that people check out some of his writings. And he's been a guest on various podcasts and so on. You can
mhm,
probably find him saying this more clearly than I can, but
mhm,
he's suggested to me that the long days in the summer
mhm.
give you lots of time outside of work. So
Yep.
if you're working 8 hours a day, and if it's light and you could do things outdoors for 24 hours a day, that gives you
Mhm,
16 potential hours at which
mhm,
you can go do things. Now, as a golf course superintendent,
mhm.
I imagine that is a bit difficult because the golfers see that it's light. They want the course to be open so they can play. So
Yep.
there's probably people teeing off all day long. When do you get the work done?
You just work in traffic. Um, if I mean, if you look at these courses, how they're staffed here, and now we're obviously closed for from like November until end of April. Therefore, it's kind of hard for the clubs to have a lot of full-time staff. That has changed a little bit over the years, but nevertheless, I mean, I'm the only on my 9 hole. NAS Golf Club is just a 9 hole course, but I'm just the only one who's full time. But I get someone coming in for 6 months, and then I get 8 young adults, or what do you want to call some 17 to 23 year olds. They're in high school slash universities just doing a summer gig, so they come in for about 3 months. But we get a lot of them, so you can imagine having on a 9 hole course in total, when we're all there, we're 10. So that's quite a high number. But it's partly because we're paying them to sit and watch golf, because I
Ah,
can show up at 5 o'clock, but there's going to be golf.
what's your tee time set up there?
No, it's like if you're a member, you can just play whenever you want to. If you want to show up at 3 o'clock in the night, you can show up at 3 o'clock at night and play golf. If you want to, it's like our official tee times run from 7 and onwards, and they're fully booked. If there's a half decent day, then they're fully booked. And we run from May through September. We are usually in the 30 to 35,000 rounds. We see regular golf clubs is in the 40, and even seen 45,000 rounds played on their courses in 5 months period.
Wow.
So
So
so you just have to deal with it. And I mean, usually we work against traffic. So usually we send our staff, 9 backwards. We don't go 1 onwards, and people just have to accept the fact that the greens aren't mown, and they don't mow. They don't complain about it. There's the golfing public sort of accepts this and understands this. So they just want to play.
Well, I guess is that good from a revenue side for the club's finances, at least in the Reykjavik area, that there's plenty of revenue coming in from the members and the active membership?
Yeah, well, we no. Here's the thing, like my course doesn't gain a lot of money out of this. It just means because we have 800 members, and we have about 900 people on the waiting list now. We just capped at 800 members, and these are very active members, by the way. They play a lot of rounds on average. Um, so we don't actually make a lot of money. We don't. I mean, we don't have our green fees are not very high, as in as a part of our income, because it's just not a lot of room for green fees. Um, Obviously, as you move away from Reykjavik area, that changes. That's where they need to get more people in to get green fees. It's just, you can argue, yes, if we keep it that way, we have more people in the club, so there are more people paying membership fees. Um, but I don't think golf in Iceland hasn't been a very expensive. Being a member of the golf club is not very expensive because these are not privately owned clubs. They are non-profit sport clubs. Almost every single one here in Iceland. There's a couple of exceptions. So there's no one making any money out of it. It's usually on municipality land, and therefore the municipality doesn't charge any fees for it. They view this as a service to the public to have sport facilities. I mean, even swimming pools, indoor, football fields and stuff like that. That's usually the local municipality that owns it and runs it. Golf clubs usually are run by the golf clubs, but they are on municipality land, and the municipality supports us. And what we need to do, because of we getting money from them, that they have a high focus on youth programs. So every club here runs a very extensive youth programs where we got, full-time staff is a PGA, a pro who's setting up the youth programs. And just in my little club, we have 130 kids practicing. And they can be
Wow.
at varying, levels, just sort of kids, parents finding something for the kids to do through the summer months, so they drop them off once a week to an hour at the range with a pro or whatever. But in a group, not a single, it's not a private lesson, but pro setting up something, chipping programs and stuff like that, up to talented kids. So
Well, it sounds from a turfgrass management perspective, it sounds like you'd be quite busy. But let's talk about the weather a little bit because
yep.
so you've got all these busy golf courses, and then during the summer people like to play, but during the
Mm-hmm.
winter you said the courses are closed, and the
Yep.
reason that the courses are closed is because they're mostly frozen. Is that right?
You-
Or is it
yeah,
just too dark and unsafe?
it's both, I guess. No, we can. I mean, sometimes when we have these pitch and putt clubs, we sometimes leave out. I did that when I worked at Cayley Golf Club. We just took 3 holes on the green, on not on the main course, but on the other course that we have is the 9-hole pitch and putt, if you like. Then we just put 3 holes because they're going to get frozen, and then we just ask people to rotate the pin. So if you putt it into that hole, just take your pin and move it into the next hole, and then walk off, and then the next one goes. And, so they rotate the traffic and on them. But there's not a lot of people who would play through the winter months. It's mostly like seniors who are more just getting time out in the fresh air and argue about politics and and telling them how the good old days were way better than this youth who is ruining everything. But you and I will be those guys soon.
Soon,
Um,
yes.
yeah. So you can run it through because the thing is, often people think about Iceland and they think ice and snow and crappy weather, but because we're an island covered with the Gulf Stream, so we are actually at we hover around 0 degrees through the winter months. So, for example, if you go to Germany, there are cities there are colder than us. If you go, obviously, Northern America, they're way colder than us through December and January and February time, because we're just about zero. We're just about freezing temperature. If we get negative 10 degrees, that's very cold. Uh,
but it but the light is so low
yeah,
and
we
the
have about
temperatures are
4 hours.
cold enough that when ice forms it stays, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like ice will stay for a little. I mean, then again, we sometimes get storms coming on from the southwest, which is just blowing off from maybe start in Florida and start moving their way up. So sometimes we get hit in January with 10 degrees and rain, and so uh, but some winters when they have dry winters, then we can have snow for an extended period. We always get snow, we always get ice. It's just sometimes it doesn't stay for very long. We've sometimes been gone through winters where we have very minimal. I mean, when was it, like 3 years ago, where we had no frozen soil throughout the winter months.
Wow. I was struck, and I don't think I'll ever forget it, when we were in the Westman Islands and we
Mhm.
went to the football pitch.
Yeah.
And I believe you'd done some consulting there, and there were parts of the pitch where the turf was just fine, and I
Mhm.
think the turf was primarily Poa pratensis. Correct me if I'm
They
if I'm
probably mix. I think it's Poana, Poa pretensis, and then a little bit of ryegrass, sort of that's been overseed. I haven't done consulting on the football pitch though, just on the golf course.
okay. Okay. Um, you took me there because it was interesting and it was a challenge and it was scenic, and I
Hmm.
was struck. This was in September, and I saw they
Hmm.
had some worn areas, and
Hmm.
I it just hit me. I mean, it hit me really hard because I was bundled up. I had a stocking cap and I
Okay.
had a warm coat and a sweatshirt underneath, and
Hmm.
I was trying to stay warm.
Yeah.
And I saw the grass was not growing, and I
Hmm.
was like, "Wait a second! It probably wasn't much warmer in August. It
Hmm.
maybe wasn't much warmer in July, and it's still freezing up until April,
Hmm.
or up until May. So you've got
Hmm.
such a short season, and then people are
Yeah.
playing sport on these surfaces. It's always astounded me uh, how one can produce a sporting surface, whether that's for golf or whether that's for football, and it just seems like it's incredibly challenging.
It is if you lose grass. It's like if you, because like trying to germinate stuff in these temperatures is slow. Everything is a bit slow, and if you and then golfers, for example, on the golf side, the golfer's expectation here is not that everything is perfect coming out of the winter. They will accept that you have, might have dead grass on it. They just want to play, so they want to get on the surfaces. They have limited understanding for you putting out a winter green in May because it's summertime, sun is out, let's play. Might be, May on average is about 7 degrees. Average day temperature. Then I mean, like twenty
That's
four
a
hour average temperature. So yeah,
okay.
that's 70. That's kind of cold. So trying to germinate anything and getting any growth out of that is very, very difficult. However, if you have grass, it's not as much of a problem. The thing is, once you go that far up north, and what we've seen this in forage research, and we definitely notice this. I've got data here from my clip walls and all that. Is that when you have 24-hour sunlight like that, or close to that, then leaves actually grow more than they would if they get a dark period. And we can see it clearly this year. For example, once we were growing on average, because I need to keep my greens growing at between 2 and 3 liters per 100 square meters. That's what
20 to
20 to
30.
30, which is quite high for most places. But remember, I'm getting, I'm averaging 220 rounds per day, sometimes seeing 260s, 270s. So we need to keep push them, and there a lot on that course. There's quite a bit of PO on them, so we need to push them that way. But um, once we got into the dark periods, like sort of mid-August, then that tapered off really rapidly, and we're now growing them at about 0.4. Uh, so that's about 4
Right.
milliliters per square meter. But the temperature in the first 10 days of September was actually highest for the entire summer. They were at 11.7. We got a warm spell. So temperatures actually increased, but our growth rates dropped down.
Okay. So
And that had nothing to do
that
with
goes
nitrogen. Nitrogen levels were, we were good on nitrogen. We're still applying nitrogen.
right. So that contradicts what I said earlier in that temperature controls things and light doesn't have such a factor. But you've just explained an instance um, where light was the controlling factor
Well,
in how
just
much it was
because
growing.
not necessarily the light energy, but it's the length of it. Because if you look into forage grass research, for example, we see that cultivars that have been grown out of like high latitudes in Norway, because they have done that quite a bit, and these cultivars always have more leaf growth than normal. Your similar cultivar. These are mostly, I'm assuming, something for cows to eat, and therefore it's fox tail grasses, something like that grows quite rapidly. But they actually have, the Norwegians tend to, cultivars grow very excessively, like leaf wise. And we see that definitely in the grasses around here. It's like once we come into the summer months, I remember when you first introduced clipwall to me and asked me to do some measurements, and I thought it was the most pointless thing ever, but I'll do it for you, Micah. Okay, so
Thank you. I
that was-
appreciate that.
yeah. So I was feeding information to you for about 3 greens. This was back in the day when I was working at Kaler Golf Club, and then you were feeding back information because you were comparing a few courses around the world, including
Hmm.
Hazeltine uh, in the U.S. And even though Hazeltine is kind of northerly for the U.S. latitude, it's still quite far south compared to us. And they're growing creeping bands, obviously. And I was looking at the clip walls, and they were growing slower than us through the
Hmm.
summer months, where you would assume, and it wasn't because we were applying crazy amount of nitrogen. We were applying around at the time 70 to 80 kilograms per year per hectare. That's shy of 2 pounds per thousand. It's like 1.7, 1.8 for those of you in America. Um, for a whole year, but that still gave us more leaf growth than Hazeltine, which probably, so the summer months averages a pretty nice growing environment. I'm assuming, right? They're not excessively hot out there.
No, they have quite a bit of temperature fluctuations,
Oh, okay,
but
okay.
but yeah, they'll have a lot of time in the summer that's quite pleasant. But
Hmm.
you know, creeping bentgrass grows a lot when it's hot too. So
Yep.
it's, I mean, if it's hot forever, it dies. But if
Mhm.
it's hot for a short period of time, the grass just grows fast. But I noticed that also when we were doing that project, which was back in 2015, 16, 17, approximately.
Mhm.
And I was just trying to get a handle on how much grass was growing around the world and trying to figure out if clipping volume was actually a useful thing to do. I
Mhm.
was struck at how similar it was in so many places and how Iceland was similar to what we were seeing in Canada and in
Mhm.
Washington and in Japan and in Hazeltine and so on. Um, it was quite similar how those curves were at the times of the year when it was peak growing season.
Yeah.
And so it's, so what you're saying is if you don't lose grass in the winter,
Mhm.
then you're usually you can manage pretty well. But if you lose grass, then you're looking at covers, pre-germinating seed, extra fertilizer. What are all the things you try?
Yeah, and then you have to, it's like the tricky bit is like it's easier to just strip a green and reseed it because when you've got some grass and some areas that don't have grass, you need to, like, if you're going to put out covers, then you need to primo or growth regulate the rest of it, and then trying to get seeds in, and then push up the nitrogen levels, and often at times your greens might be starting to look fine in sort of August, so you go through the entire season of not having great greens. I remember because I've worked in the U.S. I worked up in at Neshotic County Club, which is in Massachusetts, Concord, Massachusetts. And I remember seeing, like, we had some winter kill on 2 greens, and I remember we just put some creeping backgrass seeds down, some tarps out there, took them off 10 days later or something. They were all green. I was like, wow, you can
Yeah.
do that. And they were great by late May. They were great.
But
You can
Iceland,
never
you're
do
looking
that
at
here. Ah,
three months.
yeah. And then you get into, like I say, I mean, they're great maybe August, September, and then everything just cools down. And
Well,
October time comes and hits
cool.
you in the face.
Now, are you familiar? Have you heard of the Winter Turf Project that University of Minnesota are leading, and they're
Eric
looking at
Watkins and
Eric Watkins and that
yep,
group?
yep.
Are you participating in that?
Okay, here's the awkward bit. I signed up for it I think a couple of times, or at least once, but they didn't get funding, so it didn't go ahead. But it got funded this time around, and
Okay.
but I remember getting that email. I was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But I was like, it was a crazy busy time, and I was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll get that done later on in the day, and I just never got around to it. And then I was listening to a podcast the other day, and someone was talking about it. I was like,
Okay.
Totally forgot about that. But
I'm
I know what you're talking about. I read the stuff and what they're
well.
doing. So
For,
sorry, Eric. Sorry.
I will put a link to this because I mentioned not so much for you, although I would think
Yeah.
you or courses in Iceland would be
Hmm.
great to participate in this because of the risk of winter damage there. But for
Hmm.
anybody who's not aware of that, that's a really exciting project where the researchers are looking at the conditions that occur over a winter and then whether damage occurs and what type of damage and so on. And they're trying to find
Hmm.
solutions and to
Yeah.
understand this global problem better. And they're looking for hundreds of participants from around the world where they can have damage on cool season grass. So I will put a link to that project in the description in the show notes for anybody that's interested. Check it out.
Hmm.
It's not a huge amount of work on the participants'
No.
part. It involves some pre-winter photos to look at what the condition is going into the winter. And then during the winter, it involves weekly assessment or monitoring of how deep the snow is, if there's snow, noting whether there is the presence of standing water. These
Hmm.
I hate even saying this. It's because I would hate to be managing grass in that kind of situation, but the presence or absence of ice, the
Yeah.
presence or absence of standing water, and then in the springtime, you note with some more photos what
Hmm.
how the grass made it through the winter, and I believe there is some data collection from weather
Hmm.
stations and so on, but the people running that project can let you know about that. But
Yep.
I know they're looking for additional participants from around the world this coming winter in the northern hemisphere. So I'll put a
Hmm.
link to that.
Yeah, I'll have to check on this to see if I'm completely too late to sign up for this.
You
But it's a
know,
very interesting project, definitely.
it is, and I'm gonna ask you. Let's
Hmm.
talk about frost delays. Can we talk
Yeah.
about frost delays? Um,
Yes.
so
Definitely.
what is your policy at, or what has been your policy as you've been a course manager for a number of years in Iceland? Because there must be frost at many times of the year when the course is open.
Yeah. I mean, the first frost seen in Reykjavik this year was in either in end of July or beginning of August. But it was just a one-off event. But now we're coming into the frost thing. Now, beginning because I'm educated out of Scotland. I did all my education in Scotland and then down in Cranfield University down in Milton Keynes, just north of London. And um, when I was there, we did the classic thing, seeing pictures of black grass being, footprinting, and you're like, oh my dear lord, we don't want this. And so when I got back to Iceland, I was like, if we have frost on the ground, it's like, no, 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 you got to stay at home, and sometimes it takes forever to melt this off. Then I started thinking a little bit. I was like, wait a minute, like I went out to the course to check on the frost. I definitely walked on frosted area, and I didn't see any damage. And started thinking about it. It's like often we've seen golfers go out and play on frosty surfaces, and we didn't see any problems. So uh, when Caleb quite a long time ago, I started thinking, and then and I saw your stuff also. What you were talking about what was going on in Japan and places, and uh, I don't often see a lot of frost damage here in Iceland. It has happened, definitely, but we've seen it strangely. For example, you might see it in the rough. Someone driving on a buggy to check on greens, and you see frost damage in the rough, but not on the fairway. And then it flips over, you see frost damage on the fairway, but not in the rough. But none of it is really bad, and it recovers relatively quickly. Now, we never kill grass this way. So as I started looking into this, my policy right now, is that if I see my turf grass, so if my turf grass is growing normally, it's been hit with average temperature of above 5 degrees, in sevens, eight, and nines, or whatever, and then suddenly we get a night frost, I might put a delay on that especially if the frost goes down deep. If like -3, -4 degrees, something like that, and it gets really crunchy. However, if my turf has been hardened into the winter period, that's basically once the temperatures are below sort of 5 degrees for an for 10 to 2 weeks or something like that. If you're hovering between 0 and 5 degrees, I've always allowed people to play even though it's frosty surfaces, because I've never seen anything, no footprinting on anything on the frosty surfaces. So my view these days is I can't prove this. I haven't done the exact science or data behind the whole thing, but once turf grasses start hardening into the winter months, um, they don't seem to show up much damage at all. Um, but once you get this first frost of the years, when the turf uh, you know, is green and growing, and all of a sudden it dips down, one night, that's probably when we might get this problem. But I think what I would like us to do as an industry is research this and understand this and have a way of measuring, something you put just stick in your greens or whatever, and it measures, because I think it's got something to do with humidity, something to do with temperature, what temperature you're coming in, what time of year,
It's got to
because
do
we
that.
definitely see these footprintings. We know that we've all seen the pictures, and if you
Mhm.
mention it on Twitter, it's like, I don't think you'd have to have all these frost delays. People are like, oh, look at my pictures, that's dead grass, that's black grass, you wouldn't want that. And I was like, it's like,
Yeah, I had some interesting conversations at the Masters this year about
yeah,
frost delays, and there's a lot of golf course superintendents who are there working and as volunteers. So it's not so
yeah,
much with the Augusta National Golf Club
no,
staff as it is with some of the people from around the American Southeast. And
mm,
we're even talking about frost delays on ultra dwarf Bermuda grass and stuff. And I'm just like, are you
yeah,
kidding me? Like the grass is dormant. Why would you have a frost delay on dormant grass?
exactly.
Okay. Right. But what I took from what those superintendents are telling me,
Mm,
and especially when they're coming from high end clubs, is they say,
mm,
look, our members want the grass to be perfect.
yeah,
Our members expect the grass to be perfect. My
mm-hmm,
job is to keep the grass perfect. So I'm
mm-hmm,
not going to let them do anything, and they don't want to do anything that might damage the turf.
yeah, yeah,
So even that risk, and it's all about visual, right? And I'm
mm,
like, but they're like, but we don't need the money. We're they're It's not like
yeah,
they're losing green fees from it. That's like from
mhm,
private clubs.
yeah, yeah,
But what? So I was like, okay, I understand that. I can't argue with that. If you want it to look perfect, you don't
mm-hmm,
want any risk of a blemish,
mm-hmm. But I
then
don't think here's the thing. I don't think there will be a blemish
but
in
there's
most scenarios. There are definitely scenarios where this happens, and we haven't researched this for some reason, which is strange. Because if you get $100 from every golf club that deals with frost delays and put that into a research fund, there would be plenty enough money to come up with solutions where we know when are you going to get these blemishes that will stay on for a little while, and that's what visually could sort of hurt your business in some areas of around the world. I don't think it's going to have that much effect, to be fair, but anyways, but still, where you don't want this footprinting. But if we could say, it's like, okay, we measured the environmental conditions, we know the humidity over the X period, through the night or whatever, and the frost, and at what level it was, and what was the condition of the turf coming into this, we should be able to find like a tipping point where it's safe to go and play on frosty ground and when it's not safe. And in my case, I've sent out golfers playing, I don't know how often, on frosted surfaces, and I've hardly ever seen a problem. And that's in my climate. Again, it's in my climate. I'm in a climate where sort of you get into a cool temperatures. You know what I mean? It's sort of for an extended period. I know that some other won't have that. They might be dropping more rapidly, and that might be causing the problem. But if you can research it and find out, okay, yeah, you know what, today if you step on it, you're gonna have a black turf, the next day, or no, you can actually go out and play. And how much money will we save? hundred
yeah.
dollars a year from every golf club that deals with frosty delays. We could do this, right?
I think it's possible. You've suggested this on Twitter
Yeah,
a few times, and
yeah.
speaking I agree with you. Speaking of Twitter, I noticed yesterday you had a somewhat viral tweet. You announced that you're moving to a new position at the end of this season, and you
Yep.
put a very pretty picture of your existing golf course. If I identified it correctly.
Yes, yes. Nest Golf Club, like, is a phenomenal place because of location. You've got 360 views of, you actually have a glacier and one, playing down the first, you play into a glacier, and then you've got the entire city, amazing city views. And then we had fantastic volcano going off, and you can see you can actually see the lava getting shot in the air. It's a amazing place. But I'm just shifting ground. I mean, when you work on that property, you're obviously doing a little bit of everything, which I like. I enjoy being my own irrigation tech. I enjoy being my own mechanic. Even I enjoy being, doing all these bits and bobs. But it just gets a little bit tiring on a body that's getting slightly older. It's hard to. I snapped my Achilles tendon this year, and I noticed I'm getting a little bit older. Sports are not safe anymore, and so no, I'm moving on to GMOS. Is on the opposite side of Reykjavik, pretty much. Place that has two facilities, like a 18-holer and a 9-holer, located a bit further inland. There I'll have my, course manager in course. You got my mechanics and even a gardener. So just stepping a little bit back, if you know, I mean, sort of managing that
And
slightly different.
but uh, speak. So that's exciting. You're starting in before Christmas.
Yeah, we'll wrap up the season at Ness, and then I'm heading over there probably November time, um, most likely. And so, yeah.
Cool. Could I ask you a little bit about some of the things that I talked about on that initial visit to Iceland, which was
Mhm,
uh, MLSN, which was
mhm,
very new at that time, but you'd been implementing it. I talked about MLSN and growth potential, and
mhm.
I hadn't thought of clipping volume yet or OM246, but you've
Yep,
subsequently, um, I, I think you've been applying MLSN on football
mhm,
pitches, on
yep,
golf courses.
yep,
You've done some work with clipping volume, which you mentioned earlier you thought was one of the craziest things you'd ever heard of.
yep.
And we've recently done some OM246 testing also.
Mhm.
Do you plan to do those at the new facility? And like,
Yeah,
does MLSN work and is it widely used in Iceland?
it's getting more used, but MLSN. I mean, I started doing this like sort of mid-season 2013. You came in September, so I had no. Am I getting this? Anyway, well, started this kind of early off, and because the same reason is that I always scratch my head a little bit because we were applying all this stuff, but I was looking at areas where didn't weren't receiving, phosphorus or potassium or whatever, and they were doing absolutely fine. There was no problem there, and I was always scratching my head a little bit after reading all these books in in turf school back in the day, and like, this is really needed. And I'd been talking to a researcher up in Norway, Agnar Kvalp, and he was saying, it's like, we're not seeing any benefits of this potassium applications through the winter months. And I was like, I don't notice that. So why are we overloading like potassium nitrates and jacking up the potassium levels in the winter months? And it was not doing much for us. So when I saw your MLSN theory, it made perfect sense. So I switched over to that. And I mean, like I said, I've maintained football pitch with almost nothing but urea and ammonium sulfate when I was at Kalid for through 5 seasons of that. No problem. That's a sand-based
But
root zone.
it's because there was enough phosphorus and
Yeah, yeah,
potassium
yeah,
and
yeah,
calcium supplied
yeah.
by the soil.
Yes,
It's
and
not that
also
you
because
only do N.
no, 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 no,
It's
no. It's just because when we looked at the soil samples, we were seeing roughly a decade's worth of potassium in there, and maybe like 50 years worth of phosphorus because it had been fat the years before with relatively high amounts of phosphorus and potassium and other stuff. So once we start looking at it, it's like that's kind of high. Let's switch over to just nitrogen, and what do you know? They perform great. This is considered the best football pitch. I mean, this is at the time it was a club that was just winning the league constantly, and we were delivering what was considered the best football pitch, and just on nitrogen. And right now, I think we're down. I mean, they're applying for potassium at the moment now, at 2-to-1 ratio. Not entirely sure if any phosphorus is needed there. Yeah, I haven't been in charge of this place for the past 5 years, so I can't tell you exactly. But I'm assuming that at potassium levels right now, they need to apply it. Um, and the same thing goes for golf courses. I mean, that I've been maintaining. If you're above the MLSN limit, we don't see any problems growing it just on ureas and ammonium nitrate, or whatever nitrogen source you're using.
even in that relatively stressful climate.
No, no. The only times I deviate from it and switch into an NPK feed. I've done that a few times on Nest Club because we have a nematode problem. We have nematodes called Subanguina ratigicola. That's my Latin, which is a root gall nematode that attacks our poas. And sometimes, in their life cycle, they become a bit of a problem in sort of May, June period. And you see they don't have any root structure or anything going on. They're really struggling, the poas. And we sometimes switch over to a complete NPK feed at sort of 8:1:4 ratio,
Right.
which
So
is
then you,
more. It's just because I don't think I have any root structure. Well, there isn't root structure because it's been eaten, it's been attacked. Uh,
right.
so that's why I tend to switch over to that just for that little period. But if you look at my annual NPK ratios, PKs are kind of low. It's just to get through that like 2-week period where they're getting a bit hammered from the
Right.
nematodes.
That's
Then the nematodes ease off, and nematodes are not always the same year to year. So I might have years where I'm not that concerned about it. It's just because I don't think I have the access to the rest of the roots, the soil where
right. And so that's what I tell
it's just
people.
safety. Yeah.
I tell people, and they're like, "Well, what about salinity problems?" Or I think my nutrients are going to be locked up and or in the soil, and words that I don't like to use. I say, look, if you don't if you don't think that you have a functioning root system, just
Mhm.
apply an 8:1:4, and
Yeah.
just assume the soil can supply nothing. But
Yeah.
what people don't realize is if they would just apply a reasonable amount of nitrogen and
Mhm.
100% of phosphorus, 100% of potassium that the grass could use, something like an 8:1:4 ratio, like
Yeah.
you're doing when you don't have a root system because of
Mhm.
nematodes. If you would just do that, you would apply less fertilizer than
Mhm.
the industry does on average because the
Yep.
industry over fertilizes so much that they're applying more phosphorus than the grass can use, more potassium than the grass can use, and that's just ignoring what the soil can supply. So I have no problem with recommending what I call the precision fertilization approach or the
Yeah.
demand driven fertilization approach from Sturf.
Mhm.
And just say, look, if you don't want to trust your root system, you don't want
Mhm.
to trust it, just apply 100% of what the grass can use,
Yeah.
or apply 110% or 120%. But what I don't think is useful is applying 300% or 400%.
Uh,
And you just see sometimes you see outrageous amounts of elements that are not um, they're not used by the grass. It's not stored by the
mhm.
soil. You saw Jackie Guevara's master's research
Mhm.
project at Michigan State comparing SLAN versus MLSN.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you read any of those blog posts or saw us talk on ATC office hours, um, what was it? 378% more
Yeah. Something like that. Yeah.
potassium was applied by SLAN, and it's trying to hit
Mhm.
this target in the soil. But at the end of the experiment, she measured it,
Yeah.
and it wasn't in the soil; it was gone. So I don't like people uh, doing that um,
Mhm.
because
I think.
they're just wasting it. So it's
Yeah. Uh,
unfortunate.
it's like the research that got me thinking about this, which is, uh, wasn't it Cosso, Doc
Hmm.
Soldad, and
Yeah, Bill
Kreuzer and
Houlihan maybe.
Houlihan? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think the four of them, where they were applying just straight nitrogen, applying something with phosphorus and nitrogen, something with potassium and nitrogen, and then a complete NPK, and looking at the leaf tissues throughout that period. trying to look for, what happens when you apply that. And what do you know? Because the soil had plenty of potassium and plenty of phosphorus already in the beginning, it wasn't run low, coming into it. They didn't see any of that P or K coming into the plant. And
Right.
it's like when I read that research, I was like, that makes sense to me. That makes a lot of sense to
Yeah.
me.
And yeah, we've all kind of converged on the same answer that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense logically. It makes
Hmm.
sense. It's supported by a lot of research data, and it makes sense
And the
logically, and then it works in the field
and
too.
and varying climates, it's like I'm in a bit of an extreme climate compared to a lot of people, and absolutely works fine. It's like it really does. And the beauty about it is so cheap. I
Yeah.
remember
And
when I took over at Kaylee, I managed to drop the fertilizer budget. I'm not including other chemicals into that, just fertilizer. We dropped that by 80% by switching over to just using your ureas, and we didn't drop any quality. Greens were
yeah, yeah.
cool.
And I think then people can spend money on labor or on
Yeah,
soil surfactants or
yeah.
more top dressing sand or
Mhm.
irrigation repairs or um, whatever whatever
I
is
spent
needed.
I spent the money. Oh yeah, I did not. I did not. Oh, I don't need that money. Take that money away. I did not do that. I found other ways to use it, but it's just yeah, it's just a good. I think we got by now so much both research and experience and field experience of using it. I don't. People shouldn't really be scared of going down this route.
Cool. Well, Bjarni, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I could talk with you for another couple of hours, I'm sure, but I'm not going to burden our listeners or you because this is during both of our working hours. So I'll go ahead and say goodbye and close. And I hope maybe when you move to the new job and maybe you have some time in the winter and
Oh yeah,
it's dark outside, maybe
yeah.
we could talk again because I've got a few more posts on my blog about
Mhm.
Iceland, which I think is just absolutely fascinating. We could talk about it for so long. And so I can always use that as a pretense to say,
Yeah,
let's have a double cut about this. And then we can
yeah.
just talk about whatever we want to talk about.
Lure people into listening, but actually just talking about something else. I like your style.
Yeah.
but,
It's,
but thanks for having me, Mike. Always a pleasure chatting
it's
about turf.
all right.
Love that.
Thank you very much, Bjarni. All right,
Thanks.
everybody. I'll quickly sign off. Thank you all for listening. And I know some people are watching. I think slightly more people are listening. And I will be back again soon with another ATC Double Cut. For ATC from Bangkok, Thailand, I am Micah Woods. Bye bye.